Hey, hey, what's up, everybody? This is Satori D, and welcome to Psychedelic Sundays. We have Adam Millworth here. How is it going, Adam?
Going very well, thanks. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, be fun. And then we also have Nikki. How's it going, Nikki?
Yeah, good, thanks. Really good.
Yeah. So, recently, actually, it was actually just today. It's funny how everything seems to like come together and this kind of natural way of flowing. But anyways, I was watching CNN, and this woman was on, and she was talking about her. She was from Fox News, and she was part of this whole sexual harassment thing. And Rupert Murdoch made some statement like a couple of days ago, and kind of like dismissing that, oh, it wasn't a big problem, and it was kind of like all like fake or whatever, and it kind of got her all really mad. And so she was addressing this on the air, and it was just this really kind of impassioned rant. And it was funny because I don't think most people noticed it, but as she was talking about her sexual allegation, her sexual harassment experience, and the whole ordeal that she went through, and she couldn't get a job at Fox, and it kind of ended her media career. She kind of slipped in there that she had to take MDMA therapy. And she's I had to take MDMA illegal therapy to kind of get over her post traumatic stress disorder. And it was kind of just slipped in there and kind of just went on, and the anchor didn't really address it. And I just was like, whoa. I kind of was like just something that kind of went out there, and it kind of was just like, this is something that recently I've been thinking about. And another thing that ties in with this is that there's this thing called the Pineapple Fund, and it's some kind of anonymous donor. Since Bitcoin price has risen so crazy, that there's a lot of people with some new money, and this one Bitcoin user started this. It's called the Pineapple Fund, and it's about like $83 million that he's going to donate to charity, and $1 million of it he already donated to MAPS, which is an organization that does the MDMA research and treatment for all sorts of different ones. Usually it's kind of the near-death experience or a post-traumatic stress disorder, and just general research with MDMA and its benefits for therapy. And so it was kind of interesting that I was already thinking about this topic, and I kind of mentioned it to Nikki. I was like, hey, want to talk about MDMA on the next show? And I think, it's interesting with all the noise that's happening in the world. And this is kind of why I want to have this kind of monthly show of Psychedelic Sundays. It's kind of like there's a lot of interesting stuff happening too. If you could filter out the noise, there's some people really wanting to do interesting, beneficial work. Whether it's MAPS or other organizations, and this whole thing with the Pineapple Fund is something recently I've kind of came on my radar, and it just happened 3 days ago. I think he started it, and it's really interesting how spontaneous and organic we could use the internet, and not only like these weird dumb memes go viral, but actual good work could happen really fast. And Adam was mentioning before that he did crowdsourcing for some research. Adam, did you want to kind of like bring up that a little bit?
Yeah. It was through the Beckley Foundation. It was actually an LSD study, not MDMA, but that was their. They actually did two studies. They did one brain imaging study, and now they're I don't know if the study started or if they're still raising funds for it, but there's going to be one on the effects of microdosing LSD. And yeah, it was really, really interesting. The concept of crowdfunding, first of all, I find pretty amazing. And the fact that I was able to donate to Psychedelic Research on a substance that hasn't had research done on it in nearly 40 years due to all the legal crap that makes it hard to study Schedule 1 drugs. It was awesome to be able to fund that. But with regards to the MDMA, I definitely have seen a lot about it in the news in different circles lately, about PTSD especially, but also like end-of-life anxiety for people that are terminal, and a few other things too that I know that in the 80s it was used as for couples therapy. And I'm sure there's probably still all kinds of other things it could be used for. Obviously, right now, a lot of the research seems to be focusing on the PTSD end of it, but that's cool. That's whatever research opens the door to proving that these substances have validity in medicinal terms. I'm all for it.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. Like there's another article I read by Rick Schaussman, who wrote that book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, and he was one of the first doctors to get funding to actually do psychedelic research, and I think it was probably in the early 2000s. But anyways, he was talking about psychedelics being a super placebo, and so it's this whole thing about set and setting and how the therapy is set up, right? Is you get that benefit of that. And so if you go in with the intention that you're gonna help facilitate you know to help therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, or couples therapy, that it really helps to get that mindset in there, and to really kind of to get the desired benefit out of it, as far as if you have the right environment and you have the right coaching of that person. And it's just amazing that this potential of these substances are there, and that we're barely scratching the surface, and they kind of have been on the shelf. And it's something that it's just amazing, all the different potential that these substances have. And it kind of rubbed me, not in one sense, when I was listening to the woman speak on the news earlier, and when like my heart went out to her. And also too, I also felt like a little ticked off that like somebody with either, and it just not necessarily her, but people dealing with cancer, or at the end of life, like why can't they have a sense of peace, or whatever, that go through this therapy, whether it's LSD or ecstasy or whatever, and they kind of unburden their psychic baggage, so they could tell their loved ones what they want to say. They could kind of get process all of this stuff, because I was listening to this lecture earlier. MAPS had a psychedelic conference this year, and one of them was a panel with people who did this MDMA assisted therapy, and a lot of them were cancer patients, and it was just the whole baggage of what it means to go through the whole process of chemotherapy, and even just one of the guys was saying about how, you know, physically he went through all this stuff, right? He had to go to chemo and all this kind of stuff, and so the doctors in one sense helped him through the physical stuff. You know, he changed his diet, and he went through his routine to go through chemo, and he had all this setup for that. But he said there was like no setup of helping deal with the psychic part of it, of how much it weighed on him, of having to face death and having to like leave his loved ones, and what does that mean for him, and how does he process that? How does he come to terms with this kind of information? And it, you know, and it's funny because if anybody has, you know, MDMA is in my experience is slightly different than like, well, all the different psychedelics are have different kind of differences to them, but there's always this kind of inventory / reckoning that happens. And I think, you know, if you have a guide, or even have this proper research, that it could really help expedite this process. And, you know, like the last time we were on the show, the last time I actually took shrooms was now it's going to be almost 4 years, but 3 years ago when my grandfather died, and it helped me kind of process being all right with that, and going through my own kind of existential anguish and my own feelings with that, and to bring them to the forefront and to deal with them, and to realize it, that there's this kind of this in the terms that I'm going to use, this cosmic lineage of, this is the progression, you know, the circle of life, and this is this whole dance of eternity, and that this is just part of that. But it's, even though it's immensely sad, it's also immensely beautiful. And it got me to be able to be totally present there when I went through the funeral, and also be there for my mom when the thing happened. And it would have been even more, I think, more beneficial if I could have shared my insight. Hey, mom, I took shrooms, and you know. But if I would have said that, like, it would have created more problems than it did. And I just like kind of like silently was there for her. But I think, you know, and it's probably not for everybody, but that you could have that tool, and we could use it so that we don't, you know, like, we could deal with life and society in a better way, you know. I think, you know, that these tools are there, that they could really help in the right setting, help us process everything. I mean, some of the other stuff that I'm really excited about is the potential for as a creative agent. I know I have done it amateur style of using psychedelics as a creative agent. And even though I don't do psychedelics that much anymore, or frequently anymore, I still hold those experiences very central in the way I go about almost everything. It's very apparent on my feed, on Minds. It's almost always apparent in any video remix I do, or the music I choose, and this and that. But you know, I've been thinking about this a lot, and just the phrasing. And you know, we talked about this on the last show, but the phrasing of how we use things. And me and Nikki actually, when we had our conversation, I was talking about how it's more about getting in touch. And this is where the other title of the show is called True Hallucinations, and where it's not some alternate reality or whatever, but a deeper sense of reality. Like when I took those mushrooms, I wasn't escaping from the reality that my grandfather was dying. I was digging deep to that my grandpa was dying, and that we're eventually, everybody's going to die, and that this is the process of life, and part of it is painful, but part of it is deeply sacred, and this is deeply rooted in life, in reality, and that deep eternal truth that it holds. And I think, part of this stuff, it could help aid you. I know for me, I did I when I was in college, I would go to like raves and I would do ecstasy. But later, when I started to kind of stop doing psychedelics more for entertainment and more for like a ritual, and I came through my own amateur process, I would do. I learned it from a friend, but which is called hippie flipping, where I would take half a tab of MDMA or ecstasy, whatever I could get, and then I would do shrooms. And my process was that I would do the half, probably 30 to 40 minutes before I took the eighth of shrooms. And for me, what it was to help to get me in the right mindset. And I think for me, what ecstasy did for me was help to let the emotions kind of open up and flow. There's a lot of blockage, and especially I can only speak for myself, but me being male and how I grew up, there's like an old saying that there's no, like, I used to play baseball, so there's like no crying in baseball. It's not really encouraged for males to show emotion, so it always kind of bottled up. And so I notice in my own experience and banging my head against certain things that what people normally call the near death experience when they take shrooms, my friend would tell me all the time, like, oh, I felt like I was dying. And a lot of times when I see the struggle that would happen is because they wouldn't allow um, their their emotions to run naturally. They would try to block it. Like if they were having problems with their parents or with their significant other, they wouldn't want to deal with it, but the shrooms would kind of bring that feeling and emotion up, and it was this like struggle, this battle over it. But what the ecstasy did for me when I would do it in later, as I went through like my own trial and error, was that the ecstasy will allow me not to escape these emotions that I want, but it will be either easier for me to let them naturally flow out, and to better process them so that I could get to deeper truths of what's happening. I think you have to get past your own hang-ups, I guess, in a sense, to get to these more universal truths. And it's hard, I think, sometimes without it being so acceptable, or having a little bit of support or environment to kind of hold on to these certain things. And I think this is part of this weird, interesting time that we're in. But anyways, I kind of want to bring Nikki in.
I think that one of the key things with MDMA is that you feel when you take it, you feel a very strong sense of connection with the other people in your environment at that time. You feel a very strong sense of connection, and obviously with depression and mental disorders or personality disorders, there's this feeling of being separate from everybody, or more to the point, feeling as though you have to separate yourself from people because you may be a burden on other people, because you're going to somehow emanate your negative vibes out towards those people. So you feel like you want to isolate yourself, which I think is one of the worst issues that we need to do, that are not being dealt with mental illness and depression. Apart from it just being medicated within the medical fields, to sort of treat the symptoms of depression, whereas there's this whole issue of feeling like you've got to separate yourself and not be around people because, you know, through fear of your negativity impacting on those people. So I feel personally that with having taken it myself as well, that is one of the key things, is that it gives you a very strong sense of connection with other people. So you then feel immediately like you're connected and it relating to those people, whereas before you would be feeling as though, oh God, I couldn't possibly talk about any of this stuff with anybody because they're not going to relate to it and they're on a completely different vibration to me. So that, you know, you just shut yourself away. So I think in terms of it treating depression and helping people, that's the thing. And the other good thing about MDMA is, although it's a psychedelic, unlike mushrooms and LSD, where you can kind of drop a tab or take some mushrooms and then all of a sudden from naught psychedelic experience, you're like 101%. The peak point with MDMA is a lot more gentle. There's not this kind of like dramatic peaking, like, oh my God, I'm suddenly completely off my head. It's kind of a much gentler peaking point, you know, sensation that you feel when you've kind of got to that point of experiencing the full effects of the drug. Whereas with acid and you know, mushrooms, it can be very dramatic. You know, it can literally, there's no kind of like period where you can kind of just ease yourself into it. It's like you go from being not remotely off your head to completely off your head, whereas MDMA is a lot more gentle, a lot more relaxed. And also with MDMA you get a lot of insights into your own issues and into your own problems. You kind of you're in a much better space or headspace to be able to answer your own questions, rather than just going round and round in this kind of cycle of the same program of doing the same things, getting the same results, you know, as a side effect of doing the same things over and over again. You become much more open to sort of having an awareness of your situation. You accept your situation a lot more rather than trying to fight it and think, I've got to be different, I can't be like this anymore. You know, in terms of depression, obviously not all people that decide to take MDMA are depressed, but in terms of what we were talking about in treating depression, it gives people the opportunity to look at their situation, and it gives them sometimes profound insights into their current situation. And, you know, some of the questions that they can't answer, they can answer when they're in that state of mind that that MDMA gives them. So I, you know, but my main thing that I would always highlight is that MDMA gives you the connection that you would not have had necessarily before. Some people find it very easy to connect to all different types of people, all different manner of people, and whatever their vibe is, but other people don't have that ability. And MDMA potentially gives everybody that ability to connect with people on levels that they would never have been able to before. So I think it's, you know, that's for me is the key thing in that I would promote, you know, not in an irresponsible way, but I would promote it in terms of helping people with depression, because depression is often about, you know, often depressed people feel the need to isolate themselves because they feel ashamed of their condition, or they don't understand their condition, or depending on what their background is and what they've been told. You know, there's the classic thing of like being told to sort of, you know, you just need to snap yourself out of it, you know, that whole thing about slapping people around the face and get your act together and all that sort of stuff. And we all know that that's not possible when somebody's in a deep depression. They can't just snap themselves out of it. Just getting up in the morning to do menial things like washing themselves or remembering to do certain chores or go shopping to the grocery store or whatever is massively hard for somebody who's in a deep depression. So it's not possible. But obviously MDMA gives people a different perspective. It gives them an ability to accept their situation. And obviously the acceptance comes from being able to connect with other people. So if you're in a group of people and you all do MDMA, it doesn't matter what walks of life you come from or what your current mental status was when you before you took the MDMA, chances are you're all going to connect on a profound level once you take that drug, which is why it's so great.
One thing that I want to say about all this is that's why I think it's so important that the research is getting done where they're actually, you know, examining these things from a neurochemical point of view, where they're finding out what's going on in your brain, when they're putting people in MRI machines while they're under the influence of these substances and getting the scientific truth behind what's going on in people's brains. Because you know, I totally agree with what you said about the connection, but that's another thing that I've personally noticed. I never really did a whole lot of MDMA. I've done MDMA a few times, but I never really got very into it. And the reason why is because I'd see people that were into it a lot every weekend, and they were slowly losing themselves. Like we use the term "etard." They were abusing it. And the potential for abuse with MDMA is clearly there, because I've met lots of people that have burnt their brains out with amphetamines, you know, at raves. And they're just, that's a big part of the reason that they have that deep depression, is because their brain got used to getting happy from pills, and they've forgotten how to get happy by thinking. And in my case, when I used psilocybin to combat depression rather than MDMA, that for me personally, that experience was amazing, because it flipped a switch, and all of a sudden all these repetitive negative thoughts that I'd been having disappeared overnight. And I don't know, and I never really used MDMA in a therapeutic way. I always used it in a party way. And you know, obviously there's a difference. So I don't want to bash MDMA and say that it's horrible. Obviously, under the right circumstances, there's a lot of potential for it to be a really good thing for a lot of people. So, you know, I don't want to bash it, but that's why it's important to get the science. That's why it's important to get the research done, to get facts about these things, because there's so much potential for them, and they obviously have slightly different ways that they work in the brain. And let's face it, anyway, any of these things that we're talking about are probably better than the current methods that they use to treat depression, which are usually benzodiazepines, things like Xanax and whatnot, where you're stuck on it every day, and it's really hard to quit, and you can actually die if you cold turkey benzodiazepines. So, you know, definitely there needs to be more alternatives. There needs to be more research into mental health. Mental health is something that's largely ignored, like you said about cancer patients. They treat the cancer, they treat the tumor, but they don't treat anything else. They don't treat the whole part of it that's psychological.
Yeah, I think what's, you know, we as a society, and it just kind of goes into the whole depression thing, is that there's a real stigma of kind of that you just need to soldier on, keep quiet, keep calm, and walk around, like, you know what I mean, like, oh, like, just stiff it up, everybody's in pain and suffering, just go about and do your work. And this is kind of what I've in my own research and my own study and my own experience, I've noticed that, you know, a lot of times we don't treat the root cause of certain things, and it's not about uh, connecting or facing, you know, your own self and processing uh, your emotions or whatever is going on with you, but it's so you take this pill so you feel numb and you could go to work and you could be a mom or a dad and repeat. It is not about how maybe you're not doing whatever is fulfilling you at that time, or maybe there's some uh repressed experience that you're not processing fully because it's too hard. And I definitely think, you know, uh to emphasize what you were saying about so there's a difference between MDMA and ecstasy, which you get at, generally speaking, will get at a rave, you know. I have actually part of my own trial and error, which this is why I think what's happening with the research and actual really good studies is try to avoid some of the pitfalls that I have in my own self. One time I took what I thought was uh, MDMA, and it was supposedly supposed to be MDMA dipped in LSD. And I was like, well, this sounds kind of interesting. I've done them both together before, and I was kind of knew the guy a little bit, and I was like, oh, okay, this sounds good. And me and my friend bought them, and we took them, and we're like, this doesn't even feel like ecstasy. This feels kind of weird. And us being young and kind of dumb, we said, well, maybe we didn't take enough. And then we took another one, and it was later what I think it was a pill that was just cut with a lot of amphetamine. Like I stood up for like 3 days afterwards, and it really like messed with me a lot. And that like kind of like, oh shit, like uh and that really in the experience was really bad. It was probably one of my worst drug experiences that I've had, but also taught me a very valuable lesson to be cautious of what you take and be cognitive of what you take, and that, you know, just popping a pill to pop it is not the best idea. To actually try to, and this is the problem, right? Is someone like that woman who's going through really a traumatic experience, and that wants to become whole again and to go about her life. Uh, what are her options, right? And in one sense too, you know, she did this illegal therapy with MDMA, and you know, that she was able to do that, and she kind of expressed that it worked for her, that like, this is as far as bad as it got, this is what I had to do, this and that. But what about, you know, people that maybe don't have that financial need, as you know, when I was in my 20s and just a poor struggling college student. I mean, I bet you a legal MDMA thing costs thousands of dollars, and then you think, oh, maybe I could just go and my buddy that I just met at a rave, who I kind of semi believe because we had a good experience once, and you think, oh, I could trust them, and I'm going to buy these pills, and then you get something that you don't even know what it is, and it totally could have the adverse effect of your desired for it. And, you know, this is something, not that that there's, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot. I think I often give myself lectures in my dreams. And you know, I kind of now remember there's this thing that I was talking about the difference between let's say what I used to do kind of when I was younger was entertainment to escape my situation, meaning, that it was that, okay, I want to go to the rave and forget, uh, like, oh, like the attitude was like, oh, I'm so stressed about this or that. Like, I'm just going to go to a rave and dance and, um, try to hook up or whatever. And that was like, just nothing deeper than that. And then later, as I had some kind of, yearning and calling and doing different things of reading or writing and getting really influenced by, getting inspired by artists and different things, that I thought, well, um, let me do let me and it's funny because I I would not want. I mean, I I've a handful of times I've done ecstasy by itself, yeah, at raves in that, and for me, I remember one time I had this experience where I was like, uh, having a good time, but I kind of like was just looking around me and seeing everybody going about doing whatever it is, and I'm like, is this as a society the pinnacle of what we could do? And I just like had like this kind of uh induced existential anguish about how this can't be, as what we could do with, what, just as a society, as me as a person, but also to us as a society. And then later, as I also, a part of our talk that we had, I had this experience later. What I found out for me, what worked was to have a small group ritual with people, that we would take shrooms, and later I had a guy um, that actually got pretty good. Got MDMA, actually, like pure MDMA. And then for when I had that connection for a while, then like as we mentioned both, I think everybody kind of is on that same page, of the last show, is like, once you get the message, you hang up the phone, and kind of the more real work is that kind of integration part. And I think what's so potential about these substances is, unlike um these other antidepressant stuff, which is you have to take them like daily. This is, if you go through that therapy session, and it's like, you know people in the last time they what was it, John Hopkins mushroom experiment, which they did like almost 20 years ago. People are still, they did a reevaluating of that, and 20 years later they did that one experience, with in a therapeutic setting, did mushrooms, and they still ranked that experience as the top three of their life, along with like the birth of the kids, getting married, and that mushroom experience. Like, it was something like 70% of those people stated somewhat in that order. Maybe it was like the birth of the kids, mushroom experience, getting married, or getting married, birth of the kids, mushroom experience. Some of them was mushroom experience. It was always in that top three of their whole life experience. And it's something, if you go in with that intention, but you also coupled with the set and setting, that one experience could last you your whole life. As I have had several different experiences that I still pull from up until this day, and it's 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 both amazing and also a little sad. But there's hope for this, is that we could finally. It seems that we're finally being able to get to this point where that that we could finally explore this potential, this something, this Albert Hoffman called LSD his problem child. We finally have this thing that has this immense potential, but also has immense problems with it. If if we don't deal with it honestly and actually, I think we're supposed to live. We're supposed to go by this myth of science, right? That we study anything and have an objective thing of it, but we can't do that if there's things that are forbidden that we can't investigate, that we can't talk about, that we can't honestly say without having this like stigma to it or this bias to it. Like, how can we honestly talk about use and if we can't honestly discuss it? Yeah, Nikki.
I think that the the best way that people could ever experience a drug to enrich their lives or help heal some kind of trauma would mean that it would have to be authentic. So it wouldn't be something that would come from the medical fields where it was kind of regulated. And this sounds totally irresponsible in a way, but I think if it gets kind of into those fields, it could potentially be tampered with to the point that it becomes something totally different, that it's not kind of the pure MDMA, however you would wish to describe that. So I think that the key would be to encourage people to try these things authentically, in terms of the fact that they're human beings, they've got free will, and they can choose to do these things or not choose to do these things, which I know sounds obvious. It's like, why are you saying that? It's obvious, but it has to be an authentic thing rather than something that's been prescribed by a doctor, because I think that what I'm saying is the best way to do this is to share information and stories with people. If you've had your own experience with something, even if it's that you've abused something, because let's face it, everything on the planet that we could consider to be natural, so say mushrooms are a natural thing, or weed is a natural thing, if you take too much of it, it will have a negative effect. It's like if you abuse something, it will abuse you. It's like the quantum physics of like attracts like. So if you abuse something, it you will reap the abusive effects. You will experience the abusive effects, and it will be negative. So I think with MDMA or anything like that is going to be used to treat depression, it has to be something that is, obviously it's always going to boil down to the fact that it's somebody's choice, but if they could somehow go about it in a more authentic way, so they can go off and experience it for themselves, I think it would be far more beneficial, if that makes sense, rather than something that becomes part of that medical field where it's a prescription drug that is a certain dose. And I also have my reservations about things like psychedelics going into those realms, because this could be a whole nother show, but it's kind of like, could it get doctored to the point that it's not actually going to do the things that we're talking about that give them the benefits? There has to be something authentic.
Because I think that one of the other shows we spoke about, like Cosm, Alex Gray's place, and the idea of having like art temples or just like spiritual places where people can gather, have these type of experiences and talk about them, where it's not affiliated with any one religion or anything like that. And I think that by putting these things in a quote unquote scientific setting, and let's not forget, right now the scientists that are into this realm, they're quote unquote on our side. You know, they're people that have risked their whole careers to be able to study these things, because, you know, when they started getting into this 10, 20 years ago, there was so much, it was pretty much impossible to get approved to study these things in the first place. So to go into that field for your life's career, it was almost like committing suicide for these people. So like, to me, these guys that are studying it and these women that are studying it, they're pioneers. They're not quote unquote, you know, big pharma. And you know, these little tiny studies that are being done with 50 people or 100 people or 80 people or whatever, they're small studies. And by doing them, we're finding things out that we wouldn't have found out otherwise. And I think that one of the things that will be found out will be the set and setting. You know, if you stick someone in an MRI machine and give them MDMA, or if you sit in a circle with 7 other people that have had trauma and give them MDMA, then you're going to figure things out a little differently. You know, like the results of what happens to these people is going to be different. If you're sitting in a machine alone with things whirling around your head making crazy noises, or if you're sitting in a circle with a quote unquote therapist who you expect is going to help you, then you may end up with very, very different experiences. So I think that that's another reason that it's important that these things are being studied in this type of way. I do agree, you know, obviously you don't want to have big pharma come take over and, you know, have these substances be churned out and, you know, prescribed by doctors, you know, as a quick fix. But there's also a huge percentage of the population that would refuse to go and experience of their own free will these substances. But if a doctor prescribed them, they would. So there's also that aspect to consider, because, you know, there's a whole bunch of people that would just have a cognitive dissonance about doing something illegal. But if it was legal, they'd do it. So there's that end to think of too. Like that woman that was, you know, interviewed, she had to go underground and do it illegally. But imagine how many more people might be getting the benefits of these things if it was legal, because they wouldn't have to find shady people. Like someone like my mom, for example, she would never in a billion years go to the street to find a drug, even if it was every single person on the internet said this cures what you have. She wouldn't do it if it was illegal. So, you know, like
I totally agree.
Yeah,
with
definitely.
you. Right. It's just a really concerning issue, isn't it? Because it's like, I agree with everything you're saying, but it's like, what my biggest concern is that once it gets into those fields, what is the drug going to become? What will it become? How will it evolve? And
well, however it evolves, I think the molecular structure of MDMA is what it is.
Yeah,
and there's always going to be underground chemists that can make it.
No, that's
Yeah.
true. I can't lie.
And this is something that I think what you were saying, and I agree with Adam about the you know, it's kind of this weird thing that since it was illegal and that no one reputable was able to do any studies with this, so the type of person who for instance, I think his name is Rick Doblin, who started MAPS. He in college, you know, he did some psychedelics, and he kind of like wanted to change the world. And he gives this good story about how he read this letter by somebody in the UN saying about how we need this kind of holistic, quote unquote, spiritual experience. Like, for instance, when astronauts talk about how they went to the moon, right? and they come and they see the Earth as this little dot, and it gave them this whole new perspective on life. And you know, like 90% of them that came back wanted to like say, hey, every stupid political argument that we're having is ridiculous. Like we're tiny little dot on this little blue thing in this vast cosmos. Like get over ourselves. Like let's and so he wrote this great essay about it, but he didn't mention anything. And when Rick read his thing, he was like, I agree with everything that you're saying, but I think you're leaving out a big component of this. Is like, why aren't you mentioning psychedelics? Psychedelics are a tool that can be used to help facilitate that experience that you're talking about. And if it's done in the right setting, that is a catalyst that gets you to that point, and that helps for this kind of, you know, we're evolving towards this more equilibrium of humans on this planet dealing with each other, right? And so he wrote that letter to him, and the guy told him, I totally agree with you, but I if I would have mentioned psychedelics, and this was like in the 80s, if I would have mentioned psychedelics in that article, it would never get published. And so, you know, for a long time, there's people who will give these writings, and I've heard this similar story time and time again of some new age person or whatever, right? And quote unquote new age or avant-garde scientists, and they'll be talking about it, and they couldn't mention about how instrumental a psychedelic experience was for them. And the minute you get somebody like Aldous Huxley, who writes The Doors of Perception and talks about him taking mescaline, and at that time it was legal, but later he becomes this kind of cult person, and he's not establishment, and he becomes a counterculture figure. So it's like this weird thing, like if you want to stay publishing to the masses, you got to redact yourself about, oh, I had this religious experience, and you make it kind of mystical. Oh, but you're forgetting an important ingredient of that is a psychedelic agent to help spark that. And this is kind of perfectly goes into what I'm talking about, a true hallucination. And, you know, I was talking to Nikki about this, is that, you know, a hallucination implies a false, like something that's fake and something that's not there. And I kind of had this experience of this shared trip with my best friend at the time, and we later she coined the phrase that we had psychedelic sex. We didn't have physical sex, but our experience was that our consciousness morphed as one. We had this shared experience. The feeling of it is that we were able to access information, and that it wasn't like Terence McKenna once said about to speak and it to behold the understanding, not so there's no mistake of like, oh, I say this word and that word means something different, slightly different to that person. If I say, like, for instance, drug, right? If I say drug to my parents, oh, it's this shady thing that happens in alleys and gangsters and all this kind of stuff. But if I say it in another with my friends, like, oh, drugs, that sounds fun. We were able to communicate what we were feeling, what we were experiencing, and it was being felt. It was being seen in the same trip. And later, I told Nikki, we woke up, and I this was like 7 hours after we took the mushroom. So, physiologically speaking, the mushroom trip was over. I had no psilocybin in my system. It should have all been broken down by then. And even with that, I didn't take that large of a dose. We only took half of the eighth, which it's like a 4 to 5 hour effects of it. And you kind of have like this, this psychedelic glow hangover. Anyways, I and I usually don't say this, but I'll say it here because it's our psychedelic safe space. But so I get out of the car and it's really foggy. I'm smoking a joint, and part of the story is that earlier we were on a beach, and when the beach closed, we were late at night. We got stopped by beach patrol. They told us that the beach was closed. We had this interaction, and it's kind of funny because in our head we're like worried that we're gonna get arrested, but the beach patrol just like, oh, those two people were just very weird. And so anyways, we left, but we were very worried, and I was like, oh, I left the beer on and buried it in the sand, and I was like, I'm gonna go get it. But I was scared, like, I don't want to run into beach patrol, like, oh great, like they're gonna arrest me and all this kind of stuff. So I was still a little paranoid about that. But I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna go over there. And I'm walking, and I get to our spot, and I find the beer. But then I noticed this light off in the fog. It was really foggy, so like it was hard to see the coastline. It was hard to see, and I was like, "What is that? Is that?" Because I was really worried about beach patrol. So I was like, "Is that beach patrol?" Nah, that's not beach patrol. It's like the lights don't look like that. It looks like a buoy. I was like, but something's weird about this buoy. Like it doesn't seem like it's totally bobbing in the water. It kind of looks like it's floating on the water. Like, what can that be? But as I'm thinking this, I'm walking. I'm walking and walking and walking. And next thing I know, my friend Sheena doing. I'm like, I don't know. There's something over there. And she's like, kind of like dragging me by my arm. I'm walking, and she's like looking at me like, let's go back. Like, and worried. And I'm like, no, but there's something over there. And we're walking. So now I can see the coastline, and I swear what I see is this orb. And mind you, like, I'm not feeling any, I'm slightly stoned, but there's a different, I've done psychedelics a lot, so I know the difference between being tripping out, the when you're coming up from it, when you're off of it, being stoned, being drunk, like all sorts of different chemical, being inebriated. And I was fairly sober, just slightly stoned, but not even stoned to mistake anything. I see these orbs, these liquid orbs that are shining like this light, moving around each other. And I'm like, what the hell is that? And I'm walking more towards it with my friend. So I look at her, and I'm like, in my eyes, I'm telling her, like, we're not tripping. And it's like, do you see that? And she's kind of like, yeah, I see that. And I'm like, no, but I want to know what it is. And later, like, we had this moment where she was just like telling me with her eyes that, Daniel, like, I'm really scared. I don't know what that is, but I also don't want to like get caught by beach patrol again. Like, for the love of God, let's just get back to the car. And so it kind of broke me out of my little spell, and I went back, and we went there. And I saw something that I can't explain why I was somewhat sober. I just was slightly stoned. But later, 6 months later, I read Terence McKenna's True Hallucinations. And in True Hallucinations, he talks about his experience of meeting a UFO. And they taken mushrooms, and it happened after they had their big trip, and something called him outside. I think it was his brother, called his brother outside their little hut, and Terrence went to go look for his brother, and the brother was going off into the fog. And the way he set it up was the way I felt too. And he saw a UFO, and Terrence was kind of like, we're not like tripping out. I was like, what is this? And so like later he talks about speculation, and most of his whole career is about coining this term true hallucinations, and talking about accessing this information this non-local information, and he talks about, he's beautiful of how he describes certain things. And one of the most important things he says, when you take a trip, it's like going deep sea fishing, and you don't want to bring in a little fish that everybody has on the shore, but you don't want to go so far and so deep that you go and get a fish that you can't drag back to shore. And so that fish is this information that's out there in the non-local field, that it is part of that deep reality that I spoke about in the when going a little bit deeper about my experience with taking mushrooms when my grandfather died. And that there's part of what Nikki's fear is that it's that the real benefit, I think, or my suspicion is being able to get that deep connection to reality, these eternal truths, and not to know them intellectually, but to behold them, to integrate them within your being. And that is something that goes beyond any note card that any therapist could write. Oh, you have to follow these rules, and this is what's going to happen. That goes beyond any kind of study, any kind of thing. But what I would say is that you need to go through those first steps. Like, if you're going deep sea fishing, you need a boat, you need a fishing rod, you need some bait. So you need to follow certain steps, certain protocols to be able to get to be in that situation where you could be in a moment to catch that beauty that I talk about. Beauty is beauty. That's all there is to it. The main thing in the universe is nameless, so I call it beauty. And if you're interested in yourself, then you're stuck with yourself. But if you get interested in beauty, then you launch onto something mysterious inside your soul that grows and grows like a secret, insane thought until you're it. And this is also it doesn't have to be with psychedelics, even though psychedelics is a really good tool, but artwork is about capturing that beauty. And there's something that we talk about a lot that comes up in Imaginarium, and I think almost every artist has this experience with it, is there's this hangover portion of when you're really creative. And Nikki actually has a friend staying with her right now, and there's this kind of hard integration of it. And I think what part of that is that we're taught, or the status quo is that we're supposed to be kind of separate. Like, an artist goes off by their own and does this thing, or if you're talking about seeing something that doesn't comply with consensus reality, you don't express it. There's other stuff that I have shared that that I wish, especially about like taking mushrooms, that I could share with my parents, but I know they would not, like, kind of what Adam was saying, that it would be totally be unproductive. It totally would not be. It would have the adverse effect of that. Instead of getting me closer to them, it will create a bigger divide between us. And it's not that that I have major problems with my parents or anything, but I love them, and there's certain things that a part of me that I would like to unabashedly share with them, like some of my poetry that, like, if it mentions psychedelics, which a lot of my crazy poetry does, or I'm writing an article, and like, this is something I've done, and this is something that's deeply true to me, but I kind of censor myself with them, and that's just how my life is. And when I was younger, that was a lot of my struggle with myself, with the situation was I in, with being able to live these kind of like split lives of myself of like, oh, I'm the student and I go to work, but then also have the rave side of me, and then I had the crazy side of me. And even at that, like one time I took uh Terrence McKenna books to a 3-day rave, and I tell a joke that I didn't know it was socially unacceptable to talk about psychedelic philosophies at a 3-day rave. Why everybody was trying to like just entertain themselves and escape from the mundane life. I was like, no, I want to talk about something true and real and deeper. Like it didn't go as I imagined in my head with the people there at the rave and with my friends. But it was, I'm glad I kind of did it. But, you know, like having these spaces eventually, I think, like Cosm and other, like what I said, my vision is to have the psychedelic bed and breakfast. And it's just kind of a playful thing. Like, I don't even think, like, you know, the main focus, I think, and this is why I focus on Imaginarium and this kind of supplemental show of Psychedelic Sundays, is that these both go together, they fit somehow, and that I think, you know, the real there's two tools that can be used, and psychedelics or entheogens are this kind of catch-all things for getting in tune with a deeper um, reality, being able to techniques to get to that eternal beauty that I like to speak about. And then the art part of it is integrating, but also expressing it in a way that people can hear you. And if it's sometimes not saying psychedelics, but using it in dream imagery, or even doing the reverse. I have a lot of crazy dream experiences that I think for certain people, if I dress it up as psychedelic experience, that they could hear what that actual thing was telling me. Because, you know, dreams also imply false. In majority of people, you say, oh, I dreamed this, and they dismiss it as, oh, that's just, you know doesn't make sense, or it's just a dream, like, you know, kind of dismissing it as it being false or fake. And but you do have to um be critical. I've I have had problems at certain times with certain people when I would tell them, "Oh, but I take that with like a grain of salt as far as having um, a psychedelic trip, dreams, and this and that." Like, there's there's your own biases and your own projections that need to be weeded out to get to that core truth. But the problem is that the the words and the way we express never actually can capture the actual experience of it. And so that's why art, in a very broad sense, is the way to kind of express that. But I think, you know, a supplemental part of that is this research, is the actual like nitty gritty foundation of it, to give to tether it down into some truth, because you don't want to get lost in that sea. um I've seen a couple of my friends get lost all the way at the sea. Some of my friends think I'm lost out in that sea because I have said stuff to them that maybe they weren't ready to hear, or certain words that spark certain things for them. And, you know, this is all part of this process. But so I've been ranting and raving, and we kind of gone to the hour. If we want to wrap things up, Nikki, are you still there? Hey, Adam. Hello?
Hello. Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, you got cut off a little bit.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. But yeah, I was just saying about circle things back around and wrapping things up. Um, last kind of thoughts or anything else you want to bring up real quick or anything?
I just I think that the I really enjoy having these conversations because I hope that some people out there listen, resonate with what we're saying, and maybe examine their own lives, their own desires, whatever it is. They look into it maybe more than they would have otherwise, because really what it comes down to, and when we're talking about these things is and I think I hope I'm speaking for all of us here, is that basically we just want a better place. We want a better world to live in, and when the people around us are better people, then we live in a better place. And a lot of times these substances can help make us better people. So I think that it's awesome that we have this platform where we can discuss these things, and I think it's awesome that we're getting to know each other, so we feel comfortable talking about these things. And I hope that that the message that we're sharing here is well received, because it needs to be heard in these crazy times that we're going through. And that's why in my take of it, the quote unquote legitimate research that's being done is so awesome and so important, because it'll maybe, just the fact there's legitimate research being done on it, even though you can't go to the doctor and get it prescribed yet, maybe some of those people who have been afraid and need to try these things, or would benefit from these things, will go and try them now, and get the benefits of them. And it's an honor that you've invited me to talk on the show a couple of times, and I hope we get to chat again.
Yeah, for sure. And I really want to emphasize what you brought up, which is definitely key for what I think the potential of the show is not just to have this one-off show, but to have this kind of hopefully as we move forward, it could be this like monthly ritual, and it doesn't have to necessarily, depending on how our schedules go, focus around the full moon. But I thought it would just be interesting just to do something like that. That I think the power of it is that with a lot of this stuff, the real benefit, I think, of this kind of thing we're dancing around, whether it's Imaginarium or here on Psychedelic Sundays, is that this place for these this new story of humanity. This is a phrase that I used in the beginning of Infinite Imaginarium, that there are new stories and new possibilities that is beyond this noise that we hear blasted through our social media feed and news, that that the human spirit and creativity and love and basically progressing to a better, more cohesive world is possible, and that there's people telling these stories. And I think the magic of it is to have this continuous kind of fermentation of these ideas, that it's not just like, oh, okay, we talk about it like once and let's move on, but it's like, I mean, I'm kind of plugged into with all the new research, so it's almost like, every time I turn on, there's something really excited. Like 3 days ago, someone donated $1 million in Bitcoin to MAPS to do MDMA PTSD research, and I'm just like, whoa! And then how that kind of corresponds to things that I see reflected, because sometimes I think like, oh man, why can't these guys just take mushrooms with each other? This will solve a lot of problems. And it's like a joke that I do, but there's part of me that's like really serious about it. And I just think that, you know, as we hopefully this show grows, that anybody, we get more people in, and we kind of like rotate it, and it just evolves on its own. And I think for me, it's just the process of doing this, of having a space where you know, I could take, you know, my mask that I usually wear going about my day and kind of just let things hang out there and sit in, but also share some of my personal stories, and that hopefully that makes other people more comfortable so they could share and bring stuff to the table. Because I am always inspired when I do these shows. And you know, I always have this another like kind of deep dark secret that I always have a little. I think Carolina on the last show mentioned that she has a little anxiety of like, oh, the show's happening. But once the show happens, it takes on its life of its own if you allow it to, and it kind of re-energizes you and helps you to get focused on, okay, the next time. So we'll have this again in the new year. So that as much as I started Psychedelic Sundays, it's as much your show as much as you want it to be. So if there's any ideas, any article, person, or anything you want to bring up, just email it to me. We'll work it in. And so, I mean, that's just kind of stating what I think is obvious, but you know, just that open invitation for you. Hopefully in the new year too, we'll get Carolina back in here. She's probably going to have some crazy stories. She went to Peru, and I think she recently just got married too. So I'm interested to see what her story is of going back to Peru and then into the jungle.
Awesome. Yeah, I look forward to the new year and seeing what it's going to bring, and I look forward to talking with you again in a month or so.
Yeah, for sure.